Thank you, fellow councillors, members of the media and public. Declare this meeting of the Tuesday, the 26th of July 2022 at the council chamber. To remain upstanding for the council prayer. Almighty God, grant to us all needed guidance, wisdom and judgment as we face the tasks before us, and enable us now and always worthily to discharge the sacred trust placed by the people in our hands. Amen.
Amen.
Now there'll be an item 7. Apologies. Do you have any apologies? No. Public forum. Any issues in there?
No, Your Worship.
Declaration of interest. Are there any changes there that councillors wish to make? No. Minutes of the meeting held at council at the 28th of June. Any discussion there?
I moved it.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Minutes of the Infrastructural Services Committee meeting held on the 5th of July.
I'll move that those minutes are true and correct and be received.
Aye.
I'd second that, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Minutes of the Performance Policy and Partnership Committee meeting held on the 12th of July.
I'll move that those minutes be received, Your Worship.
Second that.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. And now a rather lengthy report on the Mayor's travel. I've got an interest in this outcome, a financial interest. So I'd like to ask
If it helps Your Worship, could I suggest that this item be the last item on today's agenda so that His Worship can work through the other issues and then come to the issue of the travel costs at the very last item? Saves vacating the position and coming back.
Unless there's any objections to that. Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
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 Carried. So we're moving that to the last item on the agenda, as suggested by the Deputy. Fees.
Mr. Morris is here, Your Worship. Mr.
Mr Morris is here to present.
Oh, thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Your Worship, through you. This is a correcting report. The Impounding Act 1955 is of a legislative age that it hasn't been modernised in quite some time, and unfortunately it still requires council to set the fees for any stock and poultry that we may need to impound from time to time. Unfortunately, that was missed during the fees and charges round, so this paper simply brings the impounding fees through to this council to correct. And with that brief introduction, happy to answer any questions.
Your Worship, in the interests of making sure that chooks are properly impounded, I'm happy to move the two recommendations.
And I'm happy to second them, Your Worship.
Any further discussion? Councillor Butler. Oh, sorry, Councillor Coventry.
Just around the operation of this, and Michael, sorry to dump this one on you, but with the dog fees, I know that Southland District Council pay a percentage of the operation of that facility. With impounding, do they pay, considering that a lot of these impounded creatures would seem to emanate more from outside the boundaries rather than inside? Do they contribute as well to that?
So, thank you through you, Your Worship. So this is quite specific to other creatures, and we have a surprisingly large amount of creatures that get impounded within the city. So this is separate. Under the Impounding Act, a pound keeper can designate any place that they require. So a paddock can be used in rural. Southland and Southland District can say that's a pound, and they will be charged the pounding fee, which is what this is setting out. Southland District do contribute to our animal care facility. But that is in relation, as far as I am aware, to dogs only.
Right.
It is not to.
So the word pound is just it just happens to be part of it.
It's some archaic legislation, not insulting anybody, of course, born before 1955. Very quick caveat on that.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. Thank you for that answer.
Corral?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Michael, just in relation to the actual fees themselves, are they increased from where we were at last year or the year before?
That is a good question. I can't answer that, Councillor. I think Trudy Hurst is here. She should be able to provide some clarity on that. Don't appear to have a microphone. No, but as I'm sure you can see from them, the fees at $10 or $5 are relatively negligible.
Through you, Your Worship. My recollection, and I need to confirm this because I haven't got the information just at hand, is that they were at a reasonably similar, we were maintaining the same level for, so it's impounding of a first animal for sheep, goats, pigs and poultry, for example, was $30 and each additional animal was $5. So these are fees that people can avoid when they have the right fencing or the right containment for stock. So they're not a fee that you get charged unless the stock have to be impounded. I can come back via email to confirm the exact figures for council.
No, that's fine by me. Yeah, I just wondered whether we'd taken the opportunity when we were upgrading this to upgrade the costs as well, but if you don't think there is, then that's fine.
Thank you. Any further discussion, questions? To the vote, all in favour say aye.
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 Against, carried. On to Great South 2021, 2022.
Your Worship, Rhiannon Suter has written this report and she is away sick. Her manager who authorised the report is also away. I'm happy to answer any questions that councillors may have.
Councillor Pottinger.
Now, thank you, Your Worship. Look, my question on the SOI is around the funding pie, and it shows stakeholder funding is 47% and external funding is 53%. Now, just with the space ops being removed, and that would have contributed to the previous 53%, I'm just wondering what the balance is. Is it still going to work out okay and not require any more shareholder funding with the space ops being removed? Or how does that balance out?
Your Worship, the shareholders have made it plain that there is no additional funding. So Great South have been advised that their funding shortfall is a matter for them to manage, and that the shareholders will not be bringing forth any additional money.
Okay, just if that's the case, then it brings up a technicality, because with the new space ops being a separate CCO, the actual accounting side of it, if it needs money out of space ops, then I don't think that couldn't be done transparently. You can't have Great South suddenly drawing on cash out of space ops to fill that gap. So you're just saying they just have to sort it out, full stop.
Your Worship, if councillors remember, at the time of the draft statement of intent, the message given by council was, in fact, let me start that again. The message given by Great South was, if you are unwilling or unable to provide additional funding for us, we would suggest that we stop funding these other, or we stop doing these other activities. Council's decision was we were unwilling to provide additional funding, and we prioritised where we wanted to see them make cuts. That matter now sits with them to manage their house accordingly.
Yeah, that just wasn't that evident in their statement of intent. Yeah, no, that's okay. We'll wait and see. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, discussion? Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just want to make a comment on the page 3 of 4 reference to the statement of intent process, and it's pointed out that the process has been that the Mayoral Forum, as a de facto group representing the Class A shareholders, has been steering the process for the last 3 years, and that there may be some thought of changing that to the Joint Shareholders Committee. It doesn't exactly affect the recommendations today, but I suppose the question would be what the advantage of that would be, considering that the Class A shareholders do have, can I say, more interest and reason why the statement of intent is of importance to them as the Class A shareholders. I think I would like to ask that perhaps the reasoning behind widening that to the Joint Shareholders Committee as a whole in the future is brought back to us at some stage. I would like to know more about the reasoning behind it and any advantage that is seen in widening that group beyond the Class A shareholders.
Your Worship, I'm happy to address Councillor Soper's question now. The shareholders' agreement states that which is to be read alongside the Constitution, and it states that the monitoring and holding to account function for Great South's activity should be undertaken by the Joint Shareholders Committee. As the issues of additional funding came up over the last year, I think that all of us have become more aware of the fact that there's been and if I use colloquial language, there's been a muddying of the waters between the role of the Southland Mayoral Forum and the role of the Joint Shareholders Committee. The desire behind the establishment of Great South and the Joint Shareholders was to recognise the role that the ILT and the ILT Foundation and the Community Trust and others have in the success of the Regional Economic Development Agency, and the Joint Shareholders Committee has not been meeting as often as it should. This, and you're right, Councillor, it's not a recommendation, but this reference to it in the report is really seeking to bring back clarity to whose role it is to ask, is Great South doing what we think it should be doing? Is it performing well in its role? And is it doing what we want to see it do through the statement of intent process? And that's why we're saying we should push it back to the Joint Shareholders Committee as part of the living to the intent of the shareholders agreement.
Thank you for the for that well thought out response. I think I would still probably like it, of course, to come back to council before that change is made, and I think all the Class A shareholders probably want to discuss it before it becomes a.
I think what's become evident is that the Class A shareholders need to meet and discuss the performance and funding requirements and stated aims and objectives of Great South, and make sure that everyone is comfortable with those. I think that the matter of space ops has highlighted that the communication between us has not been as good as it should be. And you may recall that we are undertaking a review of the Constitution, so making sure that we've got the right mechanism for shareholders also can be set alongside that.
Thank you. That gives me more comfort on the issue.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got several issues. On page 34 of board books, there's a list of shareholders A and B, and I just wanted to clarify because I understood that Mana Whenua had a role in one of those clusters of shareholders. Is that changed?
Your Worship, there is no reference to iwi in the Constitution. And I mean that respectfully, that they're not shareholders recognised in the Constitution separately.
On page 45 of our board books going forward, there's a statement of financial position. And I guess one of the things that unhinges me a little bit is that earlier on this year we had a presentation by Great South that said that they were running a bit short of money. You'll recall they were about $500,000 short because some of their government contracts were lapsing. And yet I see there in the financial statement they've got more than $2 million worth of cash and cash reserves. So I guess that's a bit of a signal, and I appreciate the fact that you said we'd be putting no more money into it as A shareholders, but it does raise some concerns that they've got some money sitting in the bank. The other issue is
sorry, Mr. Chair, and I apologise for interrupting. I just query what year that is.
Well, it's going for, it's the budget for the parent company going forward to the 30th of June 2023, so that's the next year. But the information we got some time ago was about next financial year, not this year.
Yeah.
So they were signalling they may need some more resources from us, and we pushed back on that, I guess.
Your Worship, we have no additional resources in our budget to provide to Great South.
No, that's fine. The other issue is the issue of space ops, and I'm late to this issue of space ops, but there's still some issues of concern for me. I sat at a meeting 2 meetings ago where the A stakeholders clearly made a decision to appoint 2 directors to space ops. We didn't approve the third director, which is Peter Heenan, who I don't know.
Your Worship, could I just remind all council that some matters have been considered and public excluded previously, and there is no reason to maintain that now, but some matters may also remain confidential, and councillors might like to consider that in terms of just where they're going to go with their questions.
Well, I'll back away from the names, but it worries me that as A stakeholders that we approved 2 directors to Space Ops, and there seems to be a push by Great South now to have a third one.
Your Worship, I'm going to remind all councillors that it's your decision to indicate whether you are prepared to see a third director appointed, and it's your decision whether you endorse any recommendations put forward by Great South. I want to be very explicit that this is the governance role that you have over a council-controlled organisation.
Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think if you look at the Companies Act, Section 5, I think it is when you look at is Space Ops a subsidiary or a standalone CCO? Now, if it's a subsidiary in that sense of Great South, then Great South, according to the Companies Act, would appoint the directors and stuff, if it is. But if it's not a subsidiary and it's actually a CCO, then it would be the joint committee that would appoint the directors.
Your Worship, I'm very mindful of taking up time, particularly when we've pushed to the end of the agenda another item. And this is an issue that Councillor Pottinger has raised on a number of occasions. Great South is a CCO. It wholly owns another company. By law, that is a CCO. Councillor Pottinger has raised whether that should have been consulted upon. And Councillor Pottinger is correct. It should have. However, it hasn't been. And what that means, firstly, is that the auditor will have a view about that will be reported on in our annual report. And secondly, it really means that we can't go back and do that, because my advice to you would be that to consult when the action has already been taken would be to make a mockery of our understanding of people's views. So much and all as we might not like the outcome, we need to accept that Space Ops is a CCO. In any event, Great South have also said they are prepared to make recommendations to Council on directors, but Council, as one of 4 Class A joint shareholders and as a member of the Joint Shareholders Committee, will get the opportunity to express its views there. And so this council can take its views forward to the Joint Shareholders Committee, and that will have an impact on any further directors at Space Ops.
Through you, Your Worship, can I just clarify at what stage we will have the opportunity to discuss the directors? I sat at an shareholders meeting, which was the 4 councils within the last 2 months, and we decided on how many councils there would be. So are you suggesting that there will be now another meeting where those considerations will be put to us for a second time?
Your Worship, there can be no appointment of an additional or indeed an alternative director without this council having considered the matter, and then the joint share, and every council that is a Class A shareholder, and then having a joint shareholders committee. Anything else is just ink on a page, but not actually a decision to be implemented. And Councillor, as somebody who was at that meeting, I think you can have confidence that we will continue to promote that line when that was the position put forward at the Joint Shareholders Committee meeting at the time.
And just a final point, Your Worship, in relation to Space Ops, and I just want to clear I'm a strong favour of Space Ops. I think it's a great initiative. But the people surrounding Space Ops don't tell us as shareholders a hell of a lot of information about what's going on. That's my view. And recently they said to us, we will be raising capital. And I raised the issue, well, how can you raise capital when you might be compromising our council and our council's debt profile? And the Chief Executive raised similar sorts of concerns as well. And the response was, we will come to you before we need to raise capital. And that's a concern.
So, Your Worship, I'm sorry if I've cut Councillor Clark off, but at that same meeting there was an undertaking sought that there would be no capital raising until after this council and every other shareholder that wished to had undertaken a risk workshop to ensure that Space Ops' appetite for risk met the shareholders' appetite for risk, and it has been made particularly clear to the Chair of Great South that any debt raised would be part of our debt profile and would be inappropriate until that has happened. If Councillor Clark would like, he could add an additional motion to the recommendations you have in front of you, asking that the Chief Executive of this Council write to seek that undertaking in writing again to make our position particularly clear.
Yes, Your Worship, that could be an option. One of the things that worries me is I did ask the Ian Colley, who's involved with both Great South and with Space Ops, like what sort of debt level would you be raising? And I said to him specifically, we're talking $500,000, $1 million, 5, 10, 100, stop me where it is. And I didn't get an answer. I just got this is all commercially sensitive.
Your Worship, I have sympathy with Councillor Clark's view, and all I can do and all we should all do is stick to the process of what we can control at this point in time. What we can control at this point in time is you shall not raise debt until we have considered it, because it will be part of our debt profile and it will be part of what the choices you are able to make thereafter.
Your Worship, if Councillor Clark is of a mind to move a recommendation 7 along the lines suggested, I am very happy to second that recommendation.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, Your Worship. But I guess as a final reflection, we're putting an awful lot of faith in the process, as the Chief Executive explained. But as Councillor Pottinger's already raised, we've had faith in the system before when the CCO was set up, and we weren't well advised at that time as well. So, and the same players are still there.
Your Worship, we will get another opportunity to look at this at the beginning of the next Council in terms of appointments to committees such as joint shareholders, and indeed the joint shareholders determining who their chair is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, in the SOI from Great South, it contains a sort of mini SOI from Space Ops, and that clearly states the next 3 years sort of business plan, and I'm totally aware of what Councillor Clark is getting at and is worried about. But that 3-year business plan from Space Ops shows that any dividend or any commercial money made will be reinvested into Space Ops again. Now, I would expect that SOI from Space Ops to indicate that they're not happy or they need to expand, and business as usual is not what they're doing. So just going from their statement of intent, they're not signalling any expansion dramatic beyond what they can produce themselves. That would require further investment from the shareholders. So you can read that in the statement of intent there. It's a wee section showing that. So I understand where Nobby's coming from, but if we can trust their statement of intent, they'll have to modify their statement of intent to really, I think so, maybe Andrew Cameron may know, whether that is something that a CCO would have to do before they could launch out on grand schemes.
Excuse me asking. Andrew, did you wish to comment?
He was hiding behind the pillar.
Probably on purpose. I was just preparing the motion for consideration.
Thank you, Your Worship. The short answer is that there is some debt indicated in the forward modelling. I think at this stage it's only 500,000, but it's not clear as to where that debt's going. But there is, if you have a look on page 46, there's borrowings at a group level coming in the 22-23 financial year. So other than that, the statement of intent doesn't indicate any borrowings beyond that.
No.
Just as a final comment, Your Worship, so I'll just leave it that I'm uncomfortable. the sequence of events is that Space Ops made about 500,000 profit this year and reinvested. So that's fine. That's what Councillor Potter's talking about. But since then, they have talked about raising capital. So I guess I'm just a little bit nervous about that because that has some liability for this council. I'll just leave that sitting there. Thank you.
Further discussion? Questions?
Your Worship, there were 6 recommendations on the report, and Malavika has put in red the 7th recommendation that I think Councillor Clark wishes to move.
Yes, I'm quite happy with that. Thank you.
And I will second and just make the comment that this is us exercising our A-class shareholding rights, and I am very much in favour of that being done.
Your Worship, I probably should ask, Councillor Clark and Councillor Soper prepared to move and second the
thank you.
recommendations 1 to 6 also?
Yes,
Thank you.
very happy.
I don't think there's any further discussion. You may like to put that motion, Your Worship.
No further discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
So now, Your Worship, it is item 7, and
This was moved by Councillor Clark that we received this at the end of the meeting. I'd like to invite Councillor Ludlow to chair the meeting, and I'll step down, not take any part in the discussion as I've got a pecuniary interest.
Your Worship, you really need to leave the chamber.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question, please, Your Worship? Wouldn't you use your deputy to chair the meeting when you're standing aside?
Yes, Peter, I was asked to do that, but because I've been involved with the decision making around the mayor's travel arrangements, it was felt that somebody else neutral should do that. I don't want to be in a position where we might have a split vote and have to have a casting vote. So I think somebody that's been neutral to the debate that we've had in the last week or so would be helpful.
You available to chair the meeting, Councillor Ludlow?
Yes, sir.
He'll just check his diary.
I
Thank you, Your
have
Worship. We'll
a
come and get you.
question of Councillor Ludlow. if
Sorry,
he's-
Councillor
Yes,
Abbott.
Councillor?
Yeah, Darren, I would just like your ruling or your thoughts on my thoughts, and I believe that challenges for the mayoral position coming up in the election could be seen to have a conflict of interest. And I refer to the perception, I'll just carry on, I refer to the perception that out there in the public arena, it could be discussion of an election, and I just wanted a ruling on that, because suggest that people that are mayoral candidates should perhaps refrain from this debate or this.
Sorry, Lindsay, we're having buffering issues with you, but I think I've got the gist of what you're saying. We're in a position in the triennium where anybody actually can still yet declare. On this issue, I haven't expressed an opinion, and if anybody who's standing for either mayoral candidacy or intending on rerunning for council is deemed to have an interest, then there's going to be not a lot of people with anything to say. So I don't see that it's an issue in this process. Thank you for raising it, though.
Councillor Ludlow, you coming?
I just wanted to clarify.
Good point, Lindsay.
Question of my thoughts.
Yep, thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate it. Holy.
Okay.
We're losing you.
Thought I was on the Graham Norton show for a second. Thank you, councillors. You may also or may not be aware that in your email there has been a response sent through from Sir Tim. Has everybody had a chance to look at that prior to the meeting? It did arrive very late.
Yes. Can I continue?
Yes, it is.
I'm sorry, councillor. I'm actually going to ask that councillors delete that and put it to one side. And just to explain the thought process around that, Michael, do you wish to give advice?
Yeah, it's under the standing orders. It's a financial conflict of interest for His Worship, which means that he can't speak to it or make any form of submission on it. And his email is unfortunately considered a submission. So under standing orders, you can't have any regard to what His Worship has said.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. I guess then, as a matter of process, what we were looking at. Sorry,
Councillor Abbott was going to speak. He may be buffering still.
You can, if you can wait, if I can carry on for a moment, that'd be really useful. Thanks. So, as a matter of process, we've got the report. And that the council consider matters. What we needed to advance the process is an understanding that costs were reimbursement costs were going to be sought. I think the email from His Worship has alluded to that, but regardless, I guess that can go straight to the Chief Executive or through whichever process through which reimbursement is sought. But I guess it does help give us a dollar figure. Although Mrs. Hadley, you had a
councillor, I think the best answer is if I say to you that I am asking you whether you approve costs of up to $500.
Thank you. Okay, Lindsay. Sorry, Councillor Abbott.
Okay, no, I understand. We had to get some clarity. I'm just making the point that the amount of $525, if it's reimbursed, amounts to, and I'd like you to just note this figure. 0.00045% of the annual operational expenditure of 115.9 million. So when I reflect on the numerous overseas trips that many around this table have had, the out of area conferences, etc., under different guises, and then the 20,000 expended approximately on the 7 delegates to attend this local government conference. It's a paltry sum, $525, and I just even wonder why we're debating it. And I just look to the fact that you, Darren, I think said publicly just recently that if you'd been able to attend that meeting, and it was suggested that perhaps you could at Councillor Scout's budget and take some money.
No, that was not me. That's never been a process. It was approved by council and it's been discussed in 2 previous years. That was Councillor Pottinger.
That was Councillor Pottinger.
No, okay, sorry about the name. I got the name wrong.
And you should remember, because you offered me your travel funds.
Yes, indeed. Now I'm about to do the same to the mayor, if it's possible. If he wants to take my $525, and in my time on council, I've never expended any of the budget, never been anywhere. So I welcome that. But I'd still say that it's a delicate situation. $525 represents nothing to what we spend on a meeting daily basis. And I would just like to see the respect of the office of the mayor and his rental costs met some way. That's
Thank you.
Take.
So for not wanting to draw attention to something that's a great way to tip petrol on. Councillor Lush.
No.
Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to suggest that before anybody discusses the matter any further, perhaps we could move that the report be received. I'm happy to move that way.
I'm,
brings it onto, at least brings it onto the table.
look, I think we can deal with yes, no, you're right. So you're moving that the report be received, seconded by Councillor Kett. Thank you. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against, carried. So now it's on to the matter of whether or not we want to meet costs of up to $500. As Councillor Abbott has already pointed out, it's not a great sum, but Councillor Clark, you have a comment?
Yes, I'd like to speak to this issue because I was the one that sort of, I guess, instigated the dispute back last weekend or the weekend before. So just a little bit of background to this. Last year, at last year's conference, the Mayor also sought to have a rental car provided, and the primary use of that was for his family to get around Blenheim and surrounding areas, and the Mayor was required, that was declined by Council, and the Mayor was required to reimburse that cost through fortnightly instalments. We have a regular sensitivity report that goes to Risk and Assurance, where we have to comment on these sorts of things. And when I was initially approached about 3 months ago about this, my initial view was that we wouldn't get into a public spat over what was quite a paltry amount, according to Lindsay. But at the time, I didn't realise that the Mayor was flying into Wellington as opposed to Palmerston North like the others. And so the rental car would be going significantly further than what was I initially thought it would be, and that there were 2 additional days of accommodation in there for his requirement, not for ours. And so the mayor has been very critical publicly about councillors who are seeking his role at the next election. So that's a majority of the chairs group that would normally discuss these matters. And it was also critical in the email about the chief executive's involvement. So given that this issue was raised with me about 3 days before he was actually travelling, I decided as Deputy Mayor I should take a lead on this and not engage with a whole lot of other people that might get knocked around in the media as well. So I got into some discussions backwards and forwards with the Mayor's partner, who had the authority to speak on his behalf. There seemed to me to be 2 sets of costs that I didn't think that council should bear. One was 2 nights additional accommodation in Palmerston North and the rental car. Other elected members were given the opportunity to travel Invercargill, Christchurch, Palmerston North, so that's up Wednesday, back Saturday. The Mayor was also offered that back in April this year, but declined because he wanted to make arrangements to take his family, and the travel arrangements he subsequently made went into Wellington because it was cheaper. And he was factoring in that he'd have a rental car from Wellington. As an attempt over the weekend to mediate this so that we didn't end up with this public spat, I offered on behalf of council to pay for the 2 additional nights of accommodation, which I didn't agree with, but I did offer to do that. I also suggested to his worship that he should fund the rental car, because that's consistent with last year's approach where we didn't approve. And thirdly, and more importantly, I suggested to the Mayor if he wished to be reimbursed for the matter, he should bring it to this council meeting. His colleagues collectively could decide on whether it was a small amount not to be worried about, or whether there was some public perception about additional costs for the Mayor that others were not incurring. And they should bring it here, and then collectively we could all make a decision, so it's not just people who might be aiming at being Mayor next time round. I didn't get a response to those offers. What I got was a telephone call from the ODT, and subsequently from the New Zealand Herald, and subsequently from Q&A on TV1, which I think was very poor form, because I did try to resolve this. So my view is we paid $490 for 2 nights accommodation. The rental car is about the same amount, and I think given last year's decision, it's appropriate that the Mayor incurs the extra cost, because the cost is primarily for his family, not for him. If his family were not going, he would have flown in and out of Palmerston North like everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Look, Nobby's raised some, Councillor Clark has raised some good points there, but if we go to, and that's why we have these policies, and in fact, if you look at the Local Government Act, the leader of our policies is the Mayor. We have a sensitive expenditure policy, and it's got quite clear chapters in here, and anyone can go online and see it on our website, about private travel, extended travel, travelling with spouses and family, etc., etc. So generally, the way this would work, if you played out our policy, is that you would benchmark what it would cost for the one person flying, say, Invercargill, Christchurch, Palmerston North, the 3 nights accommodation, the meals and taxis associated with that, and that sets a sum, and then you would take what the mayor has accumulated with his modes of transport, and you would seek you would pay the extra above that. That is the personal cost. It's quite straightforward. And that decision is not made by council. In fact, you submit those claims to the chief executive. And that's what I thought the mayor would have done. It's quite simple, and he would have kept a record of his costs. It's not up to a councillor to have council pay for stuff and council chase him for the money. It's the other way around. It always happens that way in business. The member would incur a cost on his own credit card and then claim it back accordingly to these rules. To me, it's straightforward.
In the grand scheme of things, for the sake of $500, this is frustrating. And personally, I think it's the timing of it is mischievous, unhelpful, and a distraction. But in order to try and progress things, I'm prepared to move that council approve the reimbursement of costs to the mayor of up to $500, subject to provision of appropriate receipts.
Seconded.
It's on the table. Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, all these points are very good, but there's one wee thing that's a wee bit different. I mean, Sir Tim is our mayor, and to be honest, I doubt whether he'd be able to travel to the LGNZ on his own, unaccompanied. So I know that doesn't really sort of change anything within the rules that are written, but that's the fact of the matter. That's just my view.
Thank you. Councillor Kett, then Councillor Pottinger.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As far back as I can remember, we've always paid for the mayor's and previous mayor's travel costs, and sometimes additional things within reason. I go back to our previous mayor, David Harrington, and his wife, Patricia. They not only got paid for conferences, but on other occasions when he had to travel out of town. But I must say, unfortunately, I wasn't here. I was in my sick bed when you discussed the number of people you send to conference. I believe it was an overkill to send 8 people to conference. If you look at the Southern District Council, including their community boards, they have 69 people elected, and they only sent 3 people. The City Council, including the Bluff Community Board, is a total of 19, and you've sent 8. I have a question though. Why did we have to pay, or why did we pay for a non-elected member to go to conference? I'm referring to the Mana Whenua rep. This is nothing personal. To me, this is totally unacceptable and should not have happened. And I believe it's ludicrous if you can fork out $3,000 to send one person to the conference and you can't pay a paltry $500 to Mayor Tim.
So the answer to your question, Councillor Kett, it was approved by the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee to meet the costs for Reverend Cook's attendance.
Well, I believe they were wrong, but there you go, I wasn't here.
You weren't. But it was carried by a majority, so I understand the question. Councillor Pottinger.
Look, with that motion that's now on the table, are we going to note that we're inconsistent with our policy, or because we have our policies? I just need to know that if we're making exceptions to the policy and doing something different, do we need to note that?
Councillor Clark.
And over and above that, where does that leave us with last year's decision where we declined a very similar amount?
Well, that's why it's on the table and open for discussion.
Sure.
Councillor Cricket, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. like you, this is extremely frustrating. It's the matter of $500, and it's honestly the fact that this just gets so much airtime and so much media for $500 just is extremely frustrating. But the fact of the matter is that it shouldn't even come up in the first place. We have a sensitive expenditure policy which this council unanimously ratified in 2018 because it was uncovered that there's been a lot of really random and interesting expenditure across the years. Some spans 21 years of Sir Tim's election tenure. In 2016, it had found that he'd spent over $18,000 at liquor stores, $19,000 on books and magazines showcasing himself personally, $3,000 on wristbands, etc.
Those were direct expenses, weren't they?
Hey?
If you're talking about the item that was published on the Taxpayers Union website, those were directorate expenses.
It speaks to the Mayoral fund that he's saying is now being washed out into thin air, which is part of this, that he used to have the mayoral travel that was part of the mayoral's office and that he had the mayoral fund. He's now saying it's gone, and these were those items that came out of that fund. The fact that we have a sensitive expenditure policy, it's only $5, but $5 every time for 21 years really adds up. For me, it comes down to, I'm not a mayoral candidate, I'm not seeking his seat, but I do really hold integrity in the fact that if I travel for council, I'm not going to incur any additional costs to the company that is not a business cost, or to the institution that isn't a business cost. My Uber receipts in attendance, which I was in attendance there, this council ratified because I'm on the Young Elected Members Committee, so I was actually there for a purpose, facilitating learning and development for young elected members, not just in attendance. I was there for a purpose. I hold integrity in the fact that we are there for that reason. I know it's only $500, but at $500 every time, and this isn't the only time the mayor travels for us across the year, it's the principle.
Thank you. Councillor Rabbit.
Yes, thank you for that. A question really to Councillor Clark. I have seen the emails that corresponded between you and the mayor and the mayoress, if you like. And do you agree that there was a compromise made from them that they would actually pay for the extra nights, the one in Wellington, the one in Palmerston North, and the extra days rental of the motor vehicle? Did that happen?
No, that's not correct. What they offered was to pay one of the extra nights and one of the 5 days for the rental.
That's right.
And that to me was going too far. I countered that by saying, I'll pay for all the accommodation, which is half the cost roughly, and you pay for the rental car. Wasn't saying no to the rental car, just saying it shouldn't be my decision, because if you read those emails, it's clear that the mayor felt that I was politicking at election time, trying to run him down, I guess, and that was not my intent. So I offered up this this meeting, so that I would not be the sole decision maker on it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a sad indictment that I have to make decisions on this anyway.
I'm just asking whether the compromise was that they would pay for night's accommodation and the day's rental of the car.
Yes, they offered one of the 2 nights and one of 5 day rent, one of the 5 days of the rental.
And do you think that he will comply with that?
Well, no, it wasn't for him to comply. They offered that up as a settlement, and I said no to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just a couple of small points. The difference between this year and last year is that last year the flights went straight into Blenheim, so there was no need for a rental car because of the timing of when His Worship made his bookings. The Wellington option was the difference. The sensitive expenditure angle is something that ends up being reported to the next Risk and Assurance Committee. Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Councillor. Just for clarity's sake, do the reimbursement of costs up to $500 include only the rental vehicle, or are we talking about accommodation and rental vehicle, or are we talking about the possible production of other receipts? I just think perhaps we have become slightly confused. What are we talking about? In
I can
those
clarify that,
costs?
Chair. The 523 is the rental car. The 490 is the 2 nights accommodation. That's separate to the rental car. So all up, if you include 2 nights and the rental car without the fuel, you're talking close to $100. Sorry, $1,000.
So what the disregarded email from the mayor referred to was looking for $400 something. So that's why the motion says reimbursement of costs of up to $500. I don't care what it is, whether it's a mixture of accommodation and the rental vehicle or what. It's the figure.
That's what I wanted clarified. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just a little bit confused.
Hmm,
The actual
okay.
cost of the flight from Wellington to Palmerston North, that's been taken into account, hasn't it? So
He
what,
didn't fly from Wellington to Palmerston
no,
North.
but if he had done.
Everybody else flew direct into Palmerston North.
Sorry, flew direct from Invercargill to Palmerston North? I don't think so. So the actual 2 flights were involved for the councillors going to the Local Governments Act, incurred costs, obviously. The difference between if the mayor had gone with the rest of the councillors on the same day or whatever, what is that actual difference?
Couldn't say, because it depends on when you book, and it's a dynamic booking system as far as ticket prices go, but the earlier the better usually, which is why shortly after registrations of interest were called for back in April, people were encouraged to have flights booked at that stage. Sometimes the later you book, the more expensive it is, but sometimes you can get standby fares that are very cheap.
I can advise one councillor incurred a lesser cost, the rest were high.
No, I'm sorry, because I thought the council would have made a group booking for that.
No.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Clark.
Just wanted to clarify your last statement, Chair. So when you suggest, I think Lindsay also reinforced it, that you'd pay costs up to $500. Are you talking about 500 costs towards the rental car, or are you suggesting 500 costs all up?
Well, the letter that we don't refer to was just looking for costs around the rental car.
Yep. So what we've got in front of us, I guess, now is that the mayor is happy for us to pay for 2 nights accommodation, 490, but is now seeking another 500.
The mayor did pay for 1 night's accommodation privately.
Okay.
So council has paid for 1, the mayor has paid for 1.
Okay, thank you.
So this request is for reimbursement, then essentially that just leaves the rental vehicle.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'm prepared to put it to a vote. All those in favour, if you could raise your hand, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
How does that work?
Councillor Clark has not raised his hand. The mayor is not present, and the Mara Whenua reps can't vote at council.
Thank you. Declare the motion carried.
Yep.
There being no further items of general business, I'll move that we go into public excluded and call back his worship to chair.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Michael, could you? Thank you.
All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thanks to the members of the public for attending and the press, and for those who've joined us on the live stream, which is ending now.